What are the general characteristics of a plant?
A plant is a multicellular, eukaryotic organism with cellulose-rich cell walls and chloroplasts that has starch as the primary carbohydrate food reserve. Plants are primarily terrestrial, autotrophic, capable of making their own food. Organisms. Most plants contain chlorophylls A and B and xanthophylls, yellow pigments, as well as carotenes, orange pigments.
What is scientific notation?
Scientific notation allows scientists to manipulate very large or very small numbers. It is based on the fact that all numbers can be expressed as the product of two numbers, one of which is the power of the number 10, written as the small superscript next to the number 10 and called the exponent. Positive exponents indicate how many times the number must be multiplied by 10. While negative exponents indicate how many times a number must be divided by 10.
What are some biological applications of chromatography?
Chromatography has many applications in biology. It is used to separate and identify amino acids, carbohydrates, fatty acids, and other natural substances. Environmental testing laboratories use chromatography to identify trace quantities of contaminants such as PCBs in waste oil and pesticides such as DDT in groundwater. It is also used to test drinking water and test air quality. Pharmaceutical companies use chromatography to prepare quantities of extremely pure materials. The food industry uses chromatography to detect contaminants such as aflatoxin.
What are the fight or flight hormones?
Epinephrine and norepinephrine are released by the adrenal glands in times of stress. The familiar feelings of a pounding, racing heart, increased respiration, elevated blood pressure, and goosebumps on the skin are responses to stressful circumstances.
How long can an orange tree produce oranges?
An average orange tree will produce fruit for 50 years, but 80 years of productivity is not uncommon. And a few trees are known to be still producing fruit after more than a century. An orange tree may attain a height of 20 feet 6.1 meters, but some trees are as much as 30 feet 9.1 meters high. Orange trees grow well in a variety of soils but prefer subtropical settings.
What is thermodynamics?
Thermodynamics is the study of the relationships between energy and the activity of a cell. The laws of thermodynamics govern the way in which cells transform chemical compounds. The first law of thermodynamics states that the total energy of a system and its surroundings will always remain constant. The second law of thermodynamics states that systems, such as a cell, tend to become disordered. Disorder usually arises in the form of heat. Entropy is the term that refers to the disorder that tends to disrupt cells, or even the universe.
What are the structures present in typical fungi?
Most fungi are a mass of intertwined filaments known as hyphae that are surrounded by a rigid cell wall. Each hypha cell has a distinct nucleus. Individual cells may be separated by walls called septa. The hyphae form a radially expanding network called the mycelium. Cytoplasm flows freely throughout hyphae, passing through major pores present in the septa. Because of this streaming, proteins synthesized throughout the hyphae may be carried to their tips, which are actively growing. As a result, fungal hyphae may grow very rapidly when food and water are abundant and the temperature is optimum.
What is the composition of urine?
Urine is composed mostly of water containing organic wastes as well as some salts. The composition of urine can vary according to diet, time of day, and diseases. In one measure, the makeup of urine is 95% water and 5% solids. In terms of organic wastes, per 1,500 ml, urine contains 30 g of urea, 1 to 2 g each of creatinine and ammonia, and 1 g of uric acid. In terms of salts or ions, 25 g per 1,500 ml of urine contain the positive ion sodium, potassium, magnesium, and calcium, as well as the negative ions chlorides, sulfates, phosphates.
How many different animals are there?
Biologists have described and named more than 1 million species of animals. And some biologists believe that there are several million to 10 million more species that remain to be discovered, classified, and named.
Can you teach an old dog new tricks?
Effective dog training is based on using the dog's normal behavior to teach it new applications. For example, rewarding Fido when he randomly performs the desired behavior will allow the trainer to eventually generate that response on demand. Theoretically, positive reinforcement can be used at any stage of a dog's life.
What is the meaning of the phrase ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny?
Ontogeny is the course of development of an organism from fertilized egg to adult. Phylogeny is the evolutionary history of a group of organisms. The phrase ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny originated with Ernst Haeckel, 1834–1919. It means that as an embryo of an advanced organism grows, it will pass through stages that look very much like the adult phase of less advanced organisms. For example, at one point each human embryo has gills and resembles a tadpole. Although further research demonstrated that early stage embryos are not representative of our evolutionary ancestors, Haeckel's general concept that the developmental process reveals some clues about evolutionary history is certainly true. Animals with recent common ancestors tend to share more similarity during development than those that do not. A dog embryo and a pig embryo will look more alike through most stages of development than a dog embryo and a salamander embryo, for example.
Are all mutations bad?
No, all mutations are not bad. Although people may use the term mutant in a disparaging manner, mutations are important to a population's gene pool because of the variation they contribute. Without mutations, there would be no variations and, following along Darwin's thinking, no natural selection.
How does a transmission electron microscope differ from a scanning electron microscope?
The electrons used to visualize the specimens in transmission. Electron microscopes are transmitted by the material. The scanning electron microscope beams the electrons onto the surface of the specimen from a fine probe that passes back and forth rapidly. Electrons reflected back from the surface of the specimen, along with other electrons emitted by the specimen itself, are amplified and transmitted to a television screen for viewing.
Do all muscle cells work the same way?
Although all muscles work by contracting, not all muscle types have sarcomeres, the muscle contraction units. Cardiac muscle cells have sarcomeres but use different support structures during contraction than those found in skeletal muscles. Smooth muscle cells don't use sarcomeres at all.
When do birds learn to sing?
Male song sparrows generally learn to sing during a critical period between 10 and 50 days after hatching. In some birds such as the mouse wren, the learning period for song development is influenced by photoperiod. Amount of daylight, and social interactions with other adult birds.
What is the founder effect?
When a small group of individuals forms the genetic basis for a new population, only the variations within that founding group will be found in the resultant population. This is known as the founder effect. An example of the founder effect is found among the finches of the Galapagos Islands.
What are the two distinct body forms of cnidarians?
The two forms are called the polyp stage and the medusa, plural, medusae, or jellyfish, stage. Polyps generally live attached to a hard surface and bud to produce more polyps and, in some cnidarians, to produce the medusa stage of the life cycle. These medusae, or jellyfish, drift with the ocean currents or swim by pulsating their umbrella-shaped bodies. Medusae release sperm and eggs into the water, where external fertilization occurs. After fertilization, the embryo develops into a larva that eventually settles to the bottom to become another polyp, thus completing the life cycle. Not all cnidarians go through both polyp and medusa stages. Some, such as corals and sea anemones, exist only as polyps.
What are simple stains?
Simple stains highlight an entire microorganism so that cellular shapes and basic structures are visible. Simple stains commonly used include methylene blue, carbolfuchsin, crystal violet, and safranine. A stain is applied to a fixed smear for a certain amount of time and then washed off. And the slide is dried and examined.
How are genes physically found in a specific genome?
Finding one gene out of a possible 30,000 to 40,000 genes in the human genome is a difficult task. However, the process is made easier if the protein product of the gene is known. As an example, if a researcher is looking to find the gene for mouse hemoglobin, he or she would isolate the hemoglobin from mouse blood and determine the amino acid sequence. The amino acid sequence could then be used as a template to generate the nucleotide sequence. Working backward again, a complementary DNA probe to the sequence would be used to identify DNA molecules with the same sequence from the entire mouse genomic library. However, if the protein product is not known, the task is more difficult. An example of this would be that of finding the susceptibility gene for late-onset Alzheimer's disease. DNA samples would be collected from family members of a patient with late-onset Alzheimer's disease. The DNA would be cut with restriction endonucleases. And restriction fragment length polymorphisms, RFLPs, would be compared among the family. If certain RFLPs are only found when the disease gene is present, then it is assumed that the distinctive fragments are markers for the gene. Geneticists then sequence the DNA in the same area of the chromosome where the marker was found, looking for potential gene candidates.
Why are ribosomes an important organelle?
Ribosomes, one of the most complex aspects of the molecular machine, are the site of protein synthesis in a cell. They consist of a large and small subunit composed of ribosomal RNA and protein. However, compared with membrane-bound organelles, ribosomes are tiny structures.
How is the term mole used in chemistry?
A mole, is a fundamental unit of measure. It refers to either the gram atomic weight or the gram molecular weight of a substance. A mole is equal to the quantity of a substance that contains 6.02 x 1023 atoms. Molecules, or formula units. This number is also called Avogadro's number, named after Amadeo Avogadro. 1776 to 1856, who is considered to be one of the founders of physical science.
How does a bacterium's requirement for oxygen act as a basis for classification?
Bacteria are divided into 4 major groups on the basis of their response to oxygen. Aerobic bacteria grow in the presence of oxygen. Microaerophilic bacteria grow best at oxygen concentrations lower than those present in air less than 20% of oxygen. Anaerobic bacteria grow best in the absence of oxygen. Facultative anaerobes can grow in the presence or absence of oxygen, with more growth when oxygen is present.
What are the most common macromolecules used as energy sources by cells?
Cells use a variety of macromolecules as energy sources. Carbohydrates, lipids, and even proteins can be metabolized for energy. ATP and related compounds are also used as temporary energy storage vehicles.
What are the main features of vascular plants?
Vascular plants have leaves, roots, cuticles, stomata, specialized stems, tissues that conduct efficiently, and, in most cases, seeds. Their sporophytes are large, dominant, and nutritionally independent.
Which animals are most demanding as pets?
There are several ways to answer this question. Physically, animals with very precise feeding requirements could be considered most demanding. An example would be the type of live food that a snake requires. On the other hand, animals with high learning capacity and communication skills can be quite exhausting for the owner. For many people, the physical and/or mental challenges of keeping a high maintenance pet like a chimpanzee or tiger can become overwhelming. Which is why so many exotic pets wind up being abandoned or given up for adoption.
Can an RNA sequence be made into DNA?
Yes, it can. A process known as reverse transcription can convert an RNA sequence into DNA by using an enzyme known as reverse transcriptase. First observed in retroviruses like HIV, reverse transcriptase has also been identified as playing a role in the copying of DNA segments from one site to another in the genome.
Where are bryophytes found?
Mosses, liverworts, and hornworts, collectively known as bryophytes, are often found in moist environments. However, there are species that inhabit almost all environments. From hot, dry deserts to the coldest regions of Antarctica. They are most noticeable when they grow in a dense mass.
How is RNA made from DNA?
In eukaryotes, first the DNA of the specific gene unwinds. Then enzymes, known as RNA polymerases, use the DNA sequence, the pairing rules, UA, GC, CG, AT, and available RNA nucleotides to efficiently copy the DNA sequence into RNA.
How long have cockroaches been on the Earth?
The earliest cockroach fossils are about 280 million years old. Cockroaches, order Dictyoptera, are nocturnal scavenging insects that eat not only human food but book bindings, ink, and whitewash as well.
How can chromosomes become damaged?
Chromosomes can become damaged physically, in their appearance, and molecularly, in the specific DNA sequences they contain. Chromosomes can break randomly or due to exposure to ionizing radiation, which acts like a miniature cannonball, blasting the strands of DNA. Other factors such as physical trauma or chemical insult can also cause breaks. When a chromosome breaks, the broken part may then reattach to another chromosome, a process called translocation. Sometimes the broken chromosomes may attach to each other, forming a ring. Any type of chemical change is known as a mutation.
What value do liverworts have ecologically?
Liverworts provide food for animals due to their ability to retain moisture. They also assist in the decay of logs and aid in the disintegration of rocks into soil.
What is a survivorship curve?
A survivorship curve can indicate how long individuals survive in a population. There are three distinct types of curves. In a type I curve, the young have a high survival rate and typically live a long life. An example of this curve can be seen in the Dall sheep that live in Mt. Denali National Park in Alaska. Humans are also an example of a type I curve. In a type 2 curve, individuals have a relatively constant death rate throughout their lifespan. An example of this curve can be found in populations of American robins. A type 3 curve includes those species that have a large number of young, most of which die at a high rate at an early age but have a lower death rate at later ages. An example of this survivorship curve can be found in lobsters and crabs.
How is cell cloning used in scientific research?
Cell cloning is the process by which an exact copy is made of a cell. This cellular process is known as mitosis and is required for the growth and repair of multicellular organisms. Different types of cells in the body differ in their ability to perform mitosis. Some cells, like skin cells, produce clones quite often. Others, like those of the nervous system, will not reproduce after they have reached maturity and have differentiated. The scientific purpose of cloning is to produce many copies of certain types of cells that can then be used for a variety of purposes, like basic research or the growth of replacement organs.
What is the difference between an invertebrate and a vertebrate?
Invertebrates are animals that lack a backbone. Almost all animals, 99%, are invertebrates. Of the more than 1 million identified animals, only 42,500 have a vertebral column, these are referred to as vertebrates. Most biologists believe the millions of species that have yet to be discovered are exclusively invertebrates.
What is the greenhouse effect?
The greenhouse effect is a warming near Earth's surface that results when Earth's atmosphere traps the sun's heat. The atmosphere acts much like the glass walls and roof of a greenhouse. This effect was first described by John Tyndall, 1820 to 1893, in 1861. It was given the greenhouse analogy much later. In 1896 by the Swedish chemist Svante Arrhenius, 1859 to 1927. The greenhouse effect is what makes Earth habitable. Without the presence of water vapor, carbon dioxide, and other gases in the atmosphere, too much heat would escape, and Earth would be too cold to sustain life. Carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and other greenhouse gases absorb the infrared radiation, rising from Earth, and hold this heat in the atmosphere instead of reflecting it back into space. Various independent historical measurements conclude that the global average near surface temperature has increased by about 33 degrees Fahrenheit (0.5 degrees Celsius) over the past 100 years. In the 20th century, the increased buildup of carbon dioxide caused by the burning of fossil fuels has been linked to this increase. There is some controversy concerning whether the increase noted in Earth's average temperature is due to the increased amount of carbon dioxide and other gases or is due to other causes. In addition to the burning of fossil fuels, volcanic activity, destruction of the rainforests, use of aerosols, and increased agricultural activity may also be contributing factors.
Did dinosaurs and humans ever coexist?
No. Dinosaurs first appeared in the Triassic period, about 220 million years ago, and disappeared at the end of the Cretaceous period, about 65 million years ago. Modern humans, Homo sapiens, appeared only about 25,000 years ago. Movies that show humans and dinosaurs existing together are only Hollywood fantasies.
What are the uses of chromatography?
Chromatography is used to separate and identify the chemicals in a mixture. It is useful to 1. Separate and identify the chemicals in a mixture. 2. Check the purity of a chemical product. 3. Identify impurities in a product. And 4. Purify a chemical product, on a laboratory or industrial scale.
What is the function of lysosomes?
Lysosomes are single, membrane-bound sacs that contain digestive enzymes. The digestive enzymes break down all the major classes of macromolecules including proteins, carbohydrates, fats, and nucleic acids throughout a cell's lifetime. The lysosomal enzymes digest old organelles to make room for newly formed organelles. The lysosomes allow cells to continually renew themselves and prevent the accumulation of cellular toxins.
Who developed plant breeding into a modern science?
Luther Burbank, 1849 to 1926, developed plant breeding as a modern science. His breeding techniques included crosses of plant strains native to North America and foreign strains. He obtained seedlings that were then grafted onto fully developed plants for an appraisal of hybrid characteristics. His keen sense of observation allowed him to recognize desirable characteristics, enabling him to select only varieties that would be useful. One of his earliest hybridization successes was the Burbank potato, from which more than 800 new strains and varieties of plants including 113 varieties of plums and prunes were developed. More than 20 of these plums and prunes are still commercially important today.
Who was Charles Darwin?
The theory of natural selection proposed by Charles Darwin, 1809 to 1882, revolutionized all aspects of natural science. Darwin was born into a family of physicians and planned to follow his father and grandfather in that profession. Unable to stand the sight of blood, he studied divinity at Cambridge and received a degree from the university in 1830.
At what speeds do fishes swim?
The maximum swimming speed of a fish is somewhat determined by the shape of its body and tail and by its internal temperature. The cosmopolitan sailfish, Istiophorus platypterus, is considered to be the fastest fish species. At least for short distances, swimming at greater than 60 miles per hour, 95 kilometers per hour. Some American fishermen, however, believe that the bluefin tuna, Thunnus thinus, is the fastest, but the fastest speed recorded for this species so far is 43.4 miles per hour, 69.8 kilometers per hour. Data is extremely difficult to secure because of the practical difficulties in measuring the speeds. The yellowfin tuna, Thunnus albicans, and the waoi, Acanthocybium solandri, are also fast. Timed at 46.35 miles per hour, 74.5 kilometers per hour, and 47.88 miles per hour, 77 kilometers per hour, respectively during 10 to 20 second sprints. Flying fish swim at 40 plus mph, 64 plus kilometers per hour, dolphins at 37 miles per hour. 60 kilometers per hour, trout at 15 miles per hour, 24 kilometers per hour, and blenny at 5 miles per hour, 8 kilometers per hour. Humans can swim 5.19 miles per hour, 8.3 kilometers per hour.
How did Louis Pasteur's theory of fermentation differ from the accepted concept of fermentation?
Louis Pasteur, 1822–1895. Proposed that fermentation is a process carried out by what he referred to as living ferments. The other renowned chemists of the time believed that fermentation was a purely chemical process in which microorganisms were a byproduct, not the cause.
What gases are commonly used for the mobile phase of gas chromatography?
The carrier gas must be chemically inert. Commonly used gases include nitrogen, helium, argon, and carbon dioxide.
How do chloroplasts work?
Chloroplasts are able to capture solar energy to perform photosynthesis. The reduction of carbon dioxide to simple carbohydrates. This process entails a series of reactions that result in the chemical splitting of water and the release of oxygen into the environment. During the light phase, chlorophyll molecules absorb energy from light and their electrons become energized. These excited electrons pass energy from one chlorophyll molecule to another, resulting in the production of ATP and a special nucleic acid type carrier known as NADP. This molecule carries the electrons to the next stage of photosynthesis, the dark phase. The dark reactions manufacture sugars using the energy stored during NADP and ATP. The conversion of carbon dioxide present in the atmosphere into carbon atoms in living organisms is called carbon fixation.
Why are leeches important in the field of medicine?
The medical leech, Hirudo medicinalis, is used to remove blood that has accumulated within tissues as a result of injury or disease. Leeches have also been applied to fingers or toes that have been surgically reattached to the body. The sucking by the leech unclogs small blood vessels, permitting blood to flow normally again through the body part. The leech releases hirudin, secreted by the salivary glands, which is an anticoagulant that prevents blood from clotting and dissolves pre-existing clots. Other salivary ingredients dilate blood vessels and act as an anesthetic. A medicinal leech can absorb as much as 5 to 10 times its body weight in blood. Complete digestion of this blood takes a long time. and these leeches feed only once or twice a year in this manner.
Are the guard cells the same in all plants?
The guard cells in all plants have the same function. They regulate the exchange of gases and water by opening and closing the stomatal pore. However, structurally they are different. Guard cells in dicots are kidney-shaped, while those in monocots are shaped like dumbbells.
What are the largest and smallest aerial spider webs?
The largest aerial webs are spun by the tropical orb weavers of the genus Nephila, which produce webs that measure up to 18.9 feet 6 meters in circumference. The smallest webs are produced by the species Glyphosis cottony. Their webs cover an area of about 0.75 sq in, 4.84 sq/cm.
Can animals commit murder?
If murder is defined as the killing of members of the same species, then some species do indeed commit murder. This could be the result of an altercation to determine dominance within the group or a battle over a resource like food or a mate. Animals, including lions and langur monkeys, have also been known to commit infanticide, death killing of infants. In these cases, infanticide has been linked to the arrival of a new alpha male in the group. Scientists surmise that by killing the infants in the group, who were fathered by some other male, the new alpha can bring their mothers into sexual receptivity faster and thus ensure a chance for reproductive success.
What are the dangers involved with transgenic animal transplants?
One of the major risks of xenotransplantation is the risk of transplanting animal viruses along with the transfer cells or organs. Since the patient is already immunosuppressed, the patient could die from the viral infection, or the virus could be spread to the general population.
What is habituation?
Habituation is the decreased response to a stimulus that is repeated without reinforcement. Habituation can be very important to an animal in its natural surroundings. As an example, young ducklings run for cover when a shadow, a possible predator, passes overhead. Gradually, however, the ducklings learn which types of shadows are dangerous and which are harmless.
What invertebrate lives in both marine and fresh waters and is one of the most important of all animals?
Copepods, tiny crustaceans, are the link between the photosynthetic life in the ocean or pond and the rest of the aquatic food web. They are primary consumers grazing on algae in the waters of the oceans and ponds. These organisms, among the most abundant multicellular animals on Earth, are then consumed by a variety of small predators, which are eaten by larger predators, and so on. Virtually all animal life in the ocean depends on the copepods, either directly or indirectly. Although humans do not eat copepods directly, our sources of food from the ocean would disappear without the copepods.
How many antimicrobial products are available?
More than 8,000 antimicrobial products are registered with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, EPA. The EPA regulates products that kill microbes on inanimate surfaces. The various products contain more than 300 different active ingredients and are available as sprays, liquids, concentrated powders, and gases. More than 50% of the 8,000 antimicrobial products are used to control infectious microorganisms in healthcare settings.
What factors have contributed to an increase in the number of resistant bacteria?
Bacteria mutate in order to adapt to new conditions. A mutation that enables a microbe to survive in the presence of an antibiotic quickly spreads throughout a microbial population. Since bacteria replicate very rapidly, a mutation can swiftly become prevalent. The overuse of antibiotics promotes the emergence of resistant bacteria. Antibiotics may also be prescribed for viral infections that they are not effective against. Furthermore, patients often fail to follow the directions for taking antibiotics precisely. A prescribed dose of antibiotics should be taken until it is completed. Although an individual can feel better shortly after starting a treatment, not completing the full course of antibiotics often destroys only the most vulnerable bacteria. Relatively resistant bacteria are able to survive and prosper in a human's body. Because antibiotic-resistant strains of bacteria do not respond to standard treatments, illnesses are able to last for longer periods of time and can result in death. The proliferation of resistant bacteria has made it more difficult to establish effective treatments.
How does deductive reasoning differ from inductive reasoning?
Deductive reasoning, often used in mathematics and philosophy, uses general principles to examine specific cases. Inductive reasoning is the method of discovering general principles by close examination of specific cases. Inductive reasoning first became important to science in the 1600s, when Francis Bacon (1561 to 1626), Sir Isaac Newton (1642 to 1727), and their contemporaries began to use the results of specific experiments to infer general scientific principles.
When was the Scopes monkey trial?
John T. Scopes, 1900 to 1970, a high school biology teacher, was brought to trial by the state of Tennessee in 1925 for teaching the theory of evolution. He challenged a law passed by the Tennessee legislature that made it unlawful to teach in any public school any theory that denied the divine creation of man. He was convicted and sentenced, but the decision was reversed later and the law repealed in 1967. In the early 21st century, pressure against school boards still affects the teaching of evolution. Recent drives by anti-evolutionists either have tried to ban the teaching of evolution or have demanded equal time for special creation as described in the biblical book of Genesis. This has raised many questions about the separation of church and state, the teaching of controversial subjects in public schools, and the ability of scientists to communicate with the public. The gradual improvement of the fossil record, the result of comparative anatomy, and many other developments in biological science has contributed toward making evolutionary thinking more palatable.
Do animals ever take advantage of each other?
Any interaction where one actor benefits while the other is hurt in some way could be described as one animal taking advantage of another. Common examples of this type of behavior include predation and parasitism.
What is a green building?
It is estimated that just building the typical wood-framed house can use enough wood to denude an entire acre of forest while generating up to 7 tons of waste material. Green building involves an integrated approach to design and construction that minimizes resource waste while emphasizing energy conservation and efficiency. Some additional approaches to green building involve solar, water heating systems and more efficient heating and cooling methods.
What different types of aggressive behavior do animals display?
Animals can show aggression through sound, e.g., growls, barks, trumpeting, sight, e.g., changing coloration, inflating body structures, and even scent. They can change the way they move, where they perch, or how much tooth enamel they display. For example, Yawning among male mandrills is often not an expression of boredom but rather an opportunity to display their well-honed canine teeth.
What are some beneficial insects?
Beneficial insects include bees, wasps, flies, butterflies, moths, and others that pollinate plants. Many fruits and vegetables depend on insect pollinators for the production of seeds. Insects are an important source of food for birds, fishes, and many animals. In some countries such insects as termites, caterpillars, ants, and bees are eaten as food by people. Products derived from insects include honey and beeswax, shellac, and silk. Some predators such as mantises, ladybugs, or lady beetles, and lacewings feed on other harmful insects. Other helpful insects are parasites that live on or in the body of harmful insects. For example, some wasps lay their eggs in caterpillars that damage tomato plants.
What is homology?
Homology is the similarity in traits between two species that is indication of their common ancestry. For example, the general characteristics of cheetahs, lions, tigers, and house cats are whiskers, retractable claws, tooth structure, and so forth. These similarities indicate that each of these traits was inherited from a feline ancestor.
What are the main types of asexual spores?
The main types of asexual spores among the fungi are arthrospores, chlamydospores, sporangiospores, and conidia, from the Greek word konidios, meaning dust. Conidia and sporangiospores are produced from a fruiting body. Neither arthrospores nor chlamydospores involve a fruiting body. Arthrospores, from the Greek term arthro, meaning joint, are formed by fragmentation of the hyphae. Chlamydospores are formed along the margin of the hyphae. They are thick-walled spores.
What is the difference between white rot fungi and brown rot fungi?
White rot fungi, found in the wood of deciduous trees, first attack the lignin of wood. Once the lignin is digested, the fungi destroy cellulose and other major parts of cells. The partially decayed wood with residual cellulose is off-white in color. Hence the name white rot fungi. Brown rot fungi, found in conifers, damage the cellulose first but do very little, if any, damage to the lignin. The name brown rot fungi came about because infected wood becomes dark reddish-brown to golden in color.
What is a daddy longlegs?
The name applies to two different kinds of invertebrates. The first is a harmless, non-biting, long-legged arachnid. Also called a harvestman, it is often mistaken for a spider. But it lacks the segmented body shape that a spider has. Although it has the same number of legs, 8. As a spider, the harvestman's legs are far longer and thinner. These very long legs enable it to raise its body high enough to avoid ants or other small enemies. Harvestmen are largely carnivorous, feeding on a variety of small invertebrates such as insects, spiders, and mites. They never spin webs as spiders do. They also eat some juicy plants and in captivity can be fed almost anything edible, from bread and milk to meat. Harvestmen also need to drink frequently. The term daddy long legs also is used for a cranefly, a thin-bodied insect with long thin legs that has a snout-like proboscis with which it sucks water and nectar.
What is the Superfund Act?
In 1980, the United States Congress passed the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act, commonly known as the Superfund Program. This law, along with amendments in 1986 and 1990, established a $16.3 billion Superfund financed jointly by federal and state governments and by special taxes on chemical and petrochemical industries, which provide 86% of the funding. The purpose of the Superfund is to identify and clean up abandoned hazardous waste, dump sites and leaking underground tanks that threaten human health and the environment. To keep taxpayers from footing most of the bill, cleanups are based on the polluter pays principle. The EPA is charged with locating dangerous dump sites, finding the potentially liable culprits, ordering them to pay for the entire cleanup, and suing them if they don't. When the EPA can find no responsible party, it draws money out of the Superfund for cleanup.
Can a cell survive in complete darkness?
Yes, cells can survive in complete darkness. A new theory on the origin of life argues that living systems arose in small compartments of total darkness located within iron sulfide rocks that were formed by hot springs on the seafloor. Cells of plant roots live in total darkness and carry out all normal plant cell activities, with the exclusion of photosynthesis. And, if you think about it, cells located in the very middle of your body also live in a pretty dark environment.
What is a gene?
A gene is a specific sequence of DNA that contains the molecular recipe for a polypeptide. A polypeptide is a subunit of a protein.
Who coined the phrase survival of the fittest?
Although frequently associated with Darwinism, this phrase was coined by Herbert Spencer. 1820 to 1903, an English sociologist. It is the process by which organisms that are less well adapted to their environment tend to perish and better adapted organisms tend to survive.
What is special about the spores of leptosporangiate ferns?
Leptosporangiate ferns are the most common ferns in North America. The sporangia of leptosporangiate ferns arise from a single surface cell, are relatively small, and have a delicate stalk and a thin sporangial wall. The small number of spores per leptosporangium is a multiple of 4, varying between 16 and 512, most often 16 or 32, in homosporous species. Each plant is able to produce millions of spores because of the large number of sporangia per sorus and the enormous number of sori per leaf. One mature plant of the species Thlypteris dentate can produce more than 50 million spores each season.
Why do animals in a zoo pace?
Pacing is an indication of lack of stimulation. A recent doctoral study found that larger animals, which have a larger home range in the wild, are particularly prone to pacing in captivity, a behavior known as cage stereotyping. Most reputable zoos attempt to assuage pacing by providing what is known as animal enrichment. Enrichment may include constantly changing objects, odors, and sounds to mimic the types of stimulations that would be found in the animal's natural habitat. As an example, in order to keep life interesting for poison dart frogs from South America, keepers will hide their crickets inside a coconut with holes drilled in it. The frogs then have to seek out the food inside the chirping coconut.
What is transformation?
Transformation is the process by which a cell or an organism incorporates foreign DNA. Transformation usually occurs between a plasmid and a bacterium. The transformed cell or organism then produces the protein encoded by the foreign DNA. In order to determine whether cells have been transformed, the foreign DNA usually contains a marker, such as the gene for penicillin resistance. Only cells with the resistance gene will be able to grow in a culture medium containing penicillin.
What are the main features of bryophytes?
Bryophytes are generally small, compact plants that rarely grow to more than 8 in 20 centimeters tall. They have parts that appear leaf-like, stem-like, and root-like, and lack vascular tissue, xylem and phloem. Most species have rhizoids, a cuticle, a cellular jacket to retain moisture around sperm-producing and egg-producing structures, and large gametophytes that hold onto sporophytes. They require water to reproduce sexually. In nature, they are noted for their intense shades of green.
Can animals learn from other animals?
Yes, animals can learn from other animals. Researchers observing the behavior of Japanese macaques would leave pieces of potato on the beach of the island where the study occurred. Every day the macaques would spend their time carefully cleaning the sand off their treats. Then one day a young female carried her potato to the sea, where she rinsed it off. Soon her mother was following her example. And then other females as well, until finally the entire troop had learned the behavior.
In the life cycles of seedless, vascular plants such as ferns, is the sporophyte or gametophyte dominant?
The seedless, vascular plants exhibit an alternation of generations consisting of heteromorphic diploid and haploid phases, as found in all plants. The life cycle of seedless, vascular plants is dominated by the sporophyte. The sporophyte is the plant, for example, trees and flowers that everyone visualizes when they think of plants.
What are the functions of trichomes?
Trichomes have many functions. They help increase the rate of water absorption and reduce the rate of water loss due to evaporation in order to keep the leaf surface cool. Trichomes also provide a defense against insects. Since the hairiness of the leaf impedes insect infestation, glandular or secretory hairs provide a chemical defense against potential herbivores.
Who originated the idea called panspermia?
Panspermia is the idea that microorganisms, spores, or bacteria attached to tiny particles of matter have traveled through space, eventually landing on a suitable planet and initiating the rise of life there. The word itself means all-seeding. The British scientist Lord Kelvin, 1824 to 1907, suggested in the 19th century that life may have arrived here from outer space, perhaps carried by meteorites. In 1903 the Swedish chemist Svante Arrhenius, 1859 to 1927, put forward the more complex panspermia idea that life on Earth was seeded by means of extraterrestrial spores, bacteria, and microorganisms coming here on tiny bits of cosmic matter.
Fish and Wildlife Service. What is the most successful and diverse group of terrestrial vertebrates?
Birds, members of the class Aves, are the most successful of all terrestrial vertebrates. There are 28 orders of living birds with almost 10,000 species distributed over almost the entire Earth. The success of birds is basically due to the development of the feather.
What protects the shoot tip as it pushes through the soil?
Many seedlings form a bend or hook in their hypocotyls to protect the delicate shoot tip. The shoot tip is pulled rather than pushed through the soil.
When was the bald eagle adopted as the national bird of the United States?
On June 20, 1782, the citizens of the newly independent United States of America adopted the bald or American eagle as their national emblem. At first the heraldic 268 artists depicted a bird that could have been a member of any of the larger species. But by 1902 the bird portrayed on the seal of the United States of America had assumed its proper white plumage on head and tail. The choice of the bald eagle was not unanimous. Benjamin Franklin, 1706 to 1790, preferred the wild turkey. Oftentimes a tongue-in-cheek humorist, Franklin thought the turkey a wily but brave, intelligent, and prudent bird. He viewed the eagle on the other hand as having a bad moral character and not getting his living honestly, preferring instead to steal fish from hard-working fish hawks. He also found the eagle a coward who readily flees from the irritating attacks of the much smaller kingbird.